Sadly, on July 27th, 2022, I received the worst news that a parent doesn't want to hear, that my newly 20-year-old daughter, Kayla Hamilton, was murdered in her own room and left on the floor like trash. The illegal MS-13 known gang member brutally raped and murdered my daughter by strangling her with a cord and robbed her of $6. During the attack, Kayla called her boyfriend for help but went to voicemail. The voicemail of the murderer strangling Kayla was 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. DHS employees failed to visually inspect the assailant by lifting his shirt to check for gang-related tattoos. Had DHS employees performed a visual inspection of the assailant's body, they would have seen MS-13 gang-related tattoos on his body, disqualifying him from entering the U.S. DHS employees failed to make a simple phone call to the El Salvador government to verify if assailant was on an MS-13 gang affiliation list. Had they done so, El Salvador government officials would have confirmed that the assailant was a known MS-13 gang member with a prior criminal history.
As painful as it is for me to do so, I wish to spare as many parents the unfathomable pain and debilitating grief that I carry every single day. My daughter Ashley has left this earth 967 days ago. Today would have been her 29th birthday. In the next 5 minutes, you will see many beautiful photos of Ashley on the screens. Photos are all that my family and I have left of her. That's not true. I guess we do have a small amount of ashes in an urn, and we do have our memories. In that same 5 minutes that I get to share her story after I traveled all the way from Arizona for Mr. Mayorkas not to appear here today, someone else's loved one in the United States will die in this same 5 minutes that I get to speak because of fentanyl. Over the next 24 hours, 190 loved ones in this country will die from fentanyl. 50% of that fentanyl is coming through my state with an open border. The beautiful state of Arizona today will lose 5 people to fentanyl. 5. Our country deserves a secure border. Our country deserves to feel safe. Our country deserves to be free of fentanyl. We need to close the fentanyl superhighway. We need to close the border. Thank you.
Now, you'll hear many of my colleagues on the left claim that fentanyl is a ports of entry problem. But in reality, just last year, the Border Patrol intercepted enough fentanyl between the ports of entry to kill every single American. And that's just what we've caught.
But through it all, Secretary Mayorkas remained committed to doing his job. The Department of Homeland Security's mission and the men and women who served with him at DHS. The Secretary is also committed to work diligently on a bipartisan basis to secure necessary funding for border security and to prepare the department for a possible shutdown.
Ms. Pearlstein, in 2019, on a New York Public Radio podcast, you were asked what you took away from a congressional hearing on impeachment standards. Your response was as follows.
So this is an exchange that came out of and really belonged in the panel in which the constitutional law professors were appearing. And there, the professors were reasonably uniform, right, in recognizing that it doesn't have to be a crime, that is to say an impeachable offense, doesn't have to be a crime as currently embodied in the federal criminal code as enacted by Congress. The existing criminal laws didn't exist when the framers wrote the Constitution, and indeed, crimes as such weren't what the framers had in mind when they put impeachment into the Constitution. What they were thinking about with the impeachment remedy were serious offenses against the public trust. That is, certain things that only the president and other senior officials could do that abused their authority. In other words, the idea of abuse of power is sort of the
Do you still stand by those words? Yes, just a yes or no quick question.
It is absolutely the case. The Congress doesn't have to show a violation of Title 18 of the U.S. Code. It has to show that there was a high crime or misdemeanor.
Reclaiming my time, I think the words that are very interesting to me is serious offenses against the public trust. Ms. Nobles, Ms. Dunn, do you think that our open border policies, which have allowed fentanyl to pour into this country, 1.8 million gotaways, unknown gotaways, is an offense against the public trust of this country?
Yes, definitely.
Ms. Dunn? Yes. Ms. Nobles, the committee has been focused. Well, first, before I ask your question, one of the things that was very interesting in your opening statement, Ms. Pearlstein, was about the power of separation, the separation of powers. And you talk about Congress having the remedy to make laws to fix the immigration issue and the border issue. But see, we passed a law that says shall detain. Mr. Mayorkas has basically completely reversed that. So you're right, we could pass more laws. In fact, we tried. We passed H.R. 2, but it won't pass the Senate because they refused to take it up. But yes, we have the power to pass more laws. They're not even following the laws that are already written. And that, from my standpoint, is basically a refusal to understand the separation of powers, that we write the laws and they enforce them. But the Secretary doesn't seem to care about that, nor does he seem to care about the 4 court orders, which have told him he's doing that and said cease and desist with these policies that are absolutely subverting the law, and he refused to follow those court orders. Ms. Nobles, the committee has been focused on the Biden administration's refusal to secure our southwest border and vet alien arrivals. A report from the House Judiciary Committee pointed out multiple vetting failures with your daughter's killer. Its report shows that your daughter's murderer was arrested for association with the MS-13 well before he came to the United States, something the United States officials verified easily after the murder occurred. The report also noted that the alien was released after he was arrested for murder. Do you think that Secretary Mayorkas has done an adequate job of vetting illegal aliens coming across our southern border?
No. And may I say that it took the local detectives to find out that he was an MS-13 gang member. Homeland Security and Department of Health and Human Services did not know that until after he killed my daughter. And then they try to write it in there after the fact.
Can you explain in simple terms why you and your colleagues concluded that impeaching the Secretary is unjustified under the Constitution?
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Yes. The term high crimes and misdemeanors, which is what's at issue here, is a limited term of art. It includes only those offenses against the system of government, not ordinary crimes, offenses against the structure of government comparable to treason and bribery, offenses that interfere in the way the government works. The allegations that have been set forth here, which are very serious, are profound complaints about the policies that the current Secretary has pursued. They're policies that the Secretary has pursued under the current President of the United States, who appointed the Secretary and was elected to pursue those policies. Policy differences, and I agree with my colleague at the last hearing, no matter how profound, are exactly not what impeachment was meant to be for.
But you brought them here, unfortunately, where our solutions may not be the solutions that they seek. Under the false pretense that impeaching Secretary Mayorkas would be in any way prevent what happened to their children from happening to someone else's. It wouldn't, and I think you know that.
Our southern border, under the control of Secretary Mayorkas, is 1,954 miles of failure. 10 million illegal crossings in 3 years. The disintegration of American sovereignty, total loss of American law and order, exponential enhancement of cartel human trafficking operations and cartel narcotics trafficking. Millions of American families crushed by financial loss and the unspeakable grief of unprecedented loss of American lives to drugs and violent crime. This is the legacy of Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and as God is my witness, we will impeach that man in this committee. We will hold him accountable for his colossal failure, and we will take no pleasure in doing so because it closes the chapter of a disastrous era of American history. We've largely lost our country down there. This body should be discussing sending massive military aid to Texas, not to Ukraine.
What's better for us to do? Fight over an impeachment or respond to President Biden's ask for additional resources at the border, in your opinion?
Impeachment will have no impact on resources available to the border. It will have no impact on the policies pursued by this administration at all.
I want to rebut a little bit the argument that's been made by my colleagues on the other side that Republicans aren't willing to secure resources for the border. And I'll just tell you that that is a complete, absolute misstatement of fact. In September, the House of Representatives passed an appropriations package for the Department of Homeland Security that appropriated an additional $2 billion. Those funds would go to hire additional agents. Those funds would go to merit pay. Those funds would go to invest in additional technology to stop the flow of fentanyl coming into this country. We also passed H.R. 2, which would have done the exact same thing. And so for my colleagues on the other aisle to say we should be more focused on funding DHS and what we're doing here today, I would argue that we have done that. We passed our appropriations bill, we sent it to the Senate, and Chuck Schumer has let that bill sit there, gathering dust, refusing to bring either H.R. 2 or the House Appropriations bill to the Senate for a vote. And so for them to say that is a complete and utter misstatement of the facts. My question is relating to a different impeachment matter. Did you feel that way last Congress for the 2 impeachments of President Trump? Did you feel that there was a constitutional basis for the impeachment of Donald Trump, either his first or second impeachment?
I did.
Okay, and so this matter differs in Secretary Mayorkas from both the first and second impeachment of the former president?
Yes.
And in what manner?
Several. First, although I've heard now several times the allegation here that Secretary Mayorkas was in some respect violating his legal responsibility, those claims, the specific claims you've raised about detention, enforcement power, were raised and litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court by the state of Texas.
Ms. Pearlstein, let me ask you, can reasonable people look at the facts and draw different conclusions?
Reasonable people can't draw different conclusions about the law as applied here.
You have to apply the law to the facts. I understand, and I don't believe that there's consensus that your version of what you believe the law is actually not. I yield back. Thank you.
Professor Pearlstein, would impeaching Secretary Mayorkas over policy differences between the Biden administration and House Republicans solve any problems facing our country?
I don't believe it would. The president retains exclusive constitutional power to replace Secretary Mayorkas with another official who he would charge with pursuing exactly the same policies here.
What do we do when we strip off our party veils and say, let's fix this issue, regardless of our party? Let's take away the notion that this one man, Secretary Mayorkas, is this boogeyman. And we send the message to the rest of the world, if we can just get rid of him, all of our problems would go away.
Do you believe that failure to uphold your oath to protect the Homeland, is that an impeachable offense?
I don't believe that anybody has ever been impeached for a failure.
I didn't ask the question. I said, do you believe that somebody who fails to uphold their oath to protect the homeland, is that an impeachable offense?
I believe that somebody who acts in his own interests or the interests of gaining his own power or in the interests of a foreign power is impeachable.
So you don't think that somebody who fails to uphold the oath to protect the homeland and does it in a way that's a dereliction of duty, you don't believe that that's impeachable? That somehow Congress doesn't have the right to exercise its power of impeachment to remove that individual who is clearly violating his oath and is derelict in his duty? You don't think that Congress can do that?
I don't know that there's evidence here of dereliction of duty.
I didn't say if there's evidence. I'm not asking evidence. Ma'am, I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time. I'd like for you to answer my question, not your question. Okay, my question is very specific. I didn't say about this case. I'm just talking in general, all right?
In general, depending on the circumstances, depending on the violation of the Constitution, it's conceivable, yes.
Okay, so if we determine that Mr. Mayorkas is derelict in his duty and has failed to uphold his oath to protect the homeland, in our opinion, okay, then is that an impeachable offense?
Again, dereliction of duty is different from failure to comply with the oath, right? To the extent the oath
I said
says
both.
A variety of
I
things.
said both. So
well, they're two different legal arguments.
I said both. Okay.
So I've addressed the
you
question.
Can't you be guilty of doing two things at the same time?
I've addressed the impeachability of dereliction of duty.
Okay,
The question of the oath is something separate. To the extent it raises an allegation of a violation of the Constitution, it is potentially impeachable, but here the Supreme Court has rejected that argument.
I don't believe they have, but anyway, I'll move on.
Is there a reason that you left out the fact that Article 3 of that impeachment case mentioned the disregarding of his duty as Secretary of War?
No.
Was it particularly helpful to your argument today?
I'm not sure what the question is.
Was there a reason you left that out?
I wasn't giving a full book report on the Belknap impeachment. Okay. I was mentioning it in my testimony.
No, that's fine.
As the only other instance in U.S. history in which Congress has ever
right in Article 3 of that. Thank you. That's the only other history. What we're talking about is unprecedented disregarding of his duty. I'm going to quote you. There, the professors were reasonably uniform in recognizing that it doesn't have to be a crime. That is to say, an impeachable offense doesn't have to be a crime as currently embodied in the Federal Criminal Code as enacted by Congress. What they were thinking about with the impeachment remedy were serious offenses against the public trust. That is, certain things that only the president and other senior officials could do that abuse their authority. Did you, in fact, say this with regards to the Trump impeachment?
I've said many things about impeachment. It's entirely possible that I said that, and I would still agree with it, actually.
If the public trust is broken, is that an impeachable offense?
Public trust in this context refers to two kinds of breaches of the public trust generally. One is an official who is acting in his own personal interest, right, to aggrandize his own political wealth interests, power, et cetera, as opposed to the interests of the American people. That's an example of a breach of the public trust. The other is if an official is acting on behalf of a foreign power, which is another example of a breach of a public trust. Yes. And I thought those issues were both implicated in the Trump-Ukraine impeachment.
Do you believe that public trust has been broken with regards to the common defense of our country?
As a general matter,
the collective defense of our country?
As a general matter, I'm not sure I can answer that question that broadly stated. Has the public... I'm not aware of any evidence, for example, that Secretary Mayorkas has been acting for his own personal wealth or aggrandizement.
Professor, for those of us who are serious about trying to improve the situation at the border, is impeachment Congress's most effective tool to do it, or are there other powers that Congress has that would be better suited to fixing the situation at the border?
Thank you, Congressman. As I've said, impeachment in this context will have no effect on administration or American border policy. Congress has a host of tools at its disposal, as the Supreme Court recently listed, and as I've testified to, including, of course, appropriations, oversight hearings, the legislative process, Senate confirmations, withholding funds, and then, of course, as I've mentioned before, elections. There are others as well.
I've also listened to them talk about impeachment. talking about impeachment, saying that impeachment is not the right thing to do when it comes to Secretary Mayorkas complaining about impeachment hearings. But I'd like to remind everyone that when they impeached President Trump, they introduced articles of impeachment on January 11th, held 0 hearings, and then passed these articles of impeachment on January 13th. Oh my, the hypocrisy. And maybe we shouldn't be having hearings on my articles of impeachment to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Maybe we should be holding articles of impeachment on the President of the United States. Is that where we're going? What do you think about that, Ms. Pearlstein? Do you think, is it a policy difference or is it Secretary Mayorkas? Which one, Biden, Joe Biden, or Secretary Mayorkas?
My impression of the allegations that the majority has raised here is that they are entirely about policy differences with
Ms. Pearlstein, you've talked about policy in your testimony today. Policy. So that would be Joe Biden. I'm sure you voted for him for president. You've been talking about the Biden administration's policy has been the cause of all of this. So is it Joe Biden's policy, the administration's policy, or is it Secretary Mayorkas?
The Constitution, no matter which official.
Ms. Pearlstein asked you a question. Is it the Biden administration or is it Secretary Mayorkas? Not the Constitution. We're not talking about the Constitution. Is it the Biden administration's open border policies or is it Secretary Mayorkas breaking federal law? One or the other. Because the statistics are clear. Are you capable of answering that question?
I'm not sure. Those were about 4 questions.
No, it's one or the other. Biden administration, open border policies, or Secretary Mayorkas.
One or the other what? Who caused it?
That has caused 300 Americans to die every single day. These 2 women sitting next to you's daughters have been murdered. We're talking about over 100,000, nearly 100,000 unaccompanied minors missing in this country. We're talking about cartel members everywhere, the cartel controlling the southern border. We're talking about the massive increase in statistics. It's either one or the other. It's either the Biden administration's open border policies or it's Secretary Mayorkas.
Ma'am, I'm
okay, we'll take
constitutional law.
No, you can't point to the Constitution.
All right, so we're a little over here. Gentlelady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You, quote, said serious offenses against the public trust could lead to an impeachment. So, Mrs. Dunn, do you believe that what has occurred and what happened to your daughter and other teenagers and Americans throughout this country just like her, do you believe that that is a serious offense against the public trust?
Yes. My border not being secure is a serious offense. Other legislators worried about other people from other countries instead of my own is a serious offense. I take great offense to that. I think you need to be worried about us.
Thank you. And Ms. Noble's the same question. Do you feel that what happened to your daughter and the crimes that have been committed against Americans by individuals who have illegally crossed our border, do you think that those are serious offenses against the public trust?
Yes, definitely.
Ms. Dunn, you would agree, would you not, that it would help to stop the fentanyl trade and fentanyl trafficking from coming into this country if we had more law enforcement officers at the border and more resources and technology to stop the fentanyl from coming in? Do you agree with that?
I disagree with that because Border Patrol is now being used to make sandwiches and to screen people and let them into our country.
Okay, well, so
I disagree with you.
So you're saying that you're upset because the Border Patrol is not doing is making sandwiches, I think you said. So you don't think it would be helpful to have more Border Patrol officers who are charged with stopping the fentanyl trade?
I would like the Border Patrol to be able to do the job that they were hired to do.
Well,
every Border Patrol officer that I have spoken to has told me that their hands are tied by this administration and Mr. Mayorkas. I've been to the border, sir. Have you? Have you?
Excuse me, I'm asking the question.
I'm just wondering.
And the problem with that is that in Congress, this Congress, we have interviewed 9 senior officials under DHS in a variety of different capacities. Every single one of them has said that it would be helpful to provide more resources at the border to stop the flow of fentanyl coming in.
You said in your paper in defense of Secretary Mayorkas that to the extent the majority of reports, allegations against the Secretary are related to those policies, in particular the suggestion that Secretary Mayorkas somehow exceeded the scope of his lawful authority to set priorities for the enforcement of U.S. immigration law. That claim has been rejected most recently by an overwhelming bipartisan majority of the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, are you referring to the United States versus Texas case from last June?
I am.
But there, the majority opinion says, quote, "We take no position on whether the executive branch here is complying with its legal obligations. We hold only that the federal courts are not the proper forum to resolve this dispute." So when you read that language, how do you come to the conclusion that the court decided that Secretary Mayorkas is acting in accordance with his legal responsibilities?
The basis of the court's ruling on standing that you just described was, as Justice Kavanaugh's opinion for the majority said, the authority to decide how to prioritize and how aggressively to pursue legal actions against defendants belongs to the executive branch under Article 2. That was the basis of the ruling, that was there is no standing in this case.
Well, they also said they've taken no position whether the executive branch is complying with its legal obligations. How is that?
Trump appointed said this is authority that belongs exclusively to the executive branch.
Right. What you're referring to is the court says we're not in the business of refereeing anything where the executive has any amount of prosecutorial discretion. But they also say we're not deciding here whether the executive branch is complying with its legal obligations. Both of those propositions are true. They're both in the opinion, are they not, ma'am?
The court found that there was no standing because...
No, ma'am. I asked you a question. This proposition is in the opinion as well, correct? I read it. It's accurate.
The court found there was no standing. That is also true.
I didn't ask you about standing. I asked you whether this language that I just read, where the court said we're not determining whether the executive branch is complying with its legal obligations, that's also in the court's opinion, correct?
That may be in the court's opinion, but
that's what I asked. Thank you. Let me ask you this. At the oral argument, this was Justice Kavanaugh's question to the Solicitor General. Solicitor General of the United States. I think your position is, instead of judicial review, Congress has to resort to shutting down the government or impeachment or dramatic steps if some administration comes in and says we're not going to enforce laws, or at least not going to enforce the laws to the degree that Congress, by law, has said the laws should be enforced. And that's forcing, I mean, I understand your position, but it's forcing Congress to take dramatic steps. Isn't that what he said at oral argument?
I don't have the transcript of oral argument.
All right, do you disagree with his proposition as I just recited it to you?
Justice Alito said in his lone dissent that impeachment, along with funding cutoffs and others, were among the potentially available remedies that Congress has. The majority opinion, none of the other 8 justices, including all of the justices appointed by the former president, mentioned impeachment in that context.
So you're aware, are you familiar with the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act of 1996?
It's a large act. Which part?
The part that the United States Supreme Court considered in United States versus Texas?
I've read the case.
Okay, you know that, as Justice Alito describes in the dissent, that in that situation, the Congress decided to withdraw some of the discretion that the executive has by requiring detention and specifically in certain cases, right?
What the court said was that for the last 27 years since that law was enacted in their current form, all 5 presidential administrations have determined the resource constraints necessitated prioritization in making immigration arrests.
If you evaded a question like that before the bench, they would not like it.
My MAGA colleagues want Fox. My Democratic colleagues want the fix. My MAGA colleagues want the fame. That's what this is entirely about. And if you have any questions as to whether that's what this is about, one of the questions earlier was asking a professor who came here to talk about immigration and the Constitution, whether she would condemn Hamas's attack on October 7th. Everyone here condemns Hamas's attack on October 7th. But if that same member was asked, would you condemn Donald Trump's role in the January 6th insurrection, or would you condemn the people on this committee who called the January 6th terrorists hostages, an insult to the actual hostages, American hostages, in Gaza right now, he would take a pass. He wouldn't want to answer the question. They couldn't answer the question because they won't condemn it. They don't want the fix. They want the fiction. If they were not willing to hold Donald Trump accountable for his impeachable crimes, I don't really want their hot
time
take.
Has expired. The
I don't want their hot
from
take
New York
on Secretary Mayorkas.
Is recognized for 5 minutes.
Nobles, does this sound like a well-run system meant to protect American people?
No. Her murderer was apprehended at the border of March of 2022. They had him. They did not check. They didn't check for his background check. They let him go to an unknown sponsor. Don't even know who the sponsor is. And she takes him to Frederick, Maryland, from Texas to Maryland. And then he ended up in the same trailer as my daughter.
As you said, as it turns out, the murderer was a known gang member, was a 16-year-old known gang member affiliated with MS-13 in El Salvador.
I want to just get back to where we're here. This is, of course, another effort, and this hearing is really about demonizing migrants and, again, smearing Secretary Mayorkas. Professor Pearlstein, thank you for being here. Are there any grounds, again, for impeaching Secretary Mayorkas under the Constitution?
I don't believe the Constitution supports impeachment in this case.
Thank you. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the most important question and really gets to the heart of why we're here today.
And they suggest that what we actually need to do is pass more laws. So as a former federal prosecutor and judge, I'll start today with a refresher on a few of the things that are currently illegal in the United States of America. It is illegal to traffic fentanyl in the United States of America. Human trafficking is illegal in this country. Theft is illegal in this country. Rape and murder are illegal in this country. What's more, the Department of Homeland Security has an absolute obligation to detain and remove those who enter this country illegally. We do not need more laws. We need a President of the United States and a Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security who enforce the laws of this country.
I would like to see every illegal immigrant who wants to come here to be properly vetted and background checked. I hear a lot about more funding, resources, and all that. How is that going to help them do their job in the first place? They failed Kayla by not checking her murderer's background and did not make that one phone call. One phone call could have saved my baby's life. They didn't. And after he was arrested, they Child Protective Services took him and put him in an unsecured children's home with other children.
My Republican colleagues have not come close to making a constitutionally sound case for impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas. They have incorrectly argued that the Secretary's designations of certain groups as eligible for parole constitutes, quote, mass parole, and is inconsistent with law. Each case is considered on a discretionary case-by-case basis, which is a requirement in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It is worth noting that parole authority has been used by every administration since President Eisenhower, who paroled 30,000 Hungarian nationals fleeing communism. Professor Pearlstein, does the Secretary's exercise of well-established parole authority constitute treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors?
I don't believe it does, no.
Thank you. My Republican colleagues have also argued that Secretary Mayorkas is violating the law by releasing migrants awaiting adjudication of their asylum claims. That claim is not true, and that practice is not new. In fact, DHS released hundreds of thousands of individuals at the U.S.-Mexico border under President Trump. Professor Pearlstein, does detaining migrants in a manner consistent with the law and the resources provided by this Congress constitute treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors?
No, it doesn't.
Madam Chairwoman, the Biden administration has often falsely claimed that 90% of all fentanyl comes through ports of entry. I actually have a video of Secretary Mayorkas claiming that, and if we could play that, please.
And people should understand, it is not in between the ports of entry that the majority of fentanyl is sought to be smuggled. It's not through the migrants that we encounter in between the ports of entry. It's through passenger vehicles, through commercial trucks at our ports of entry where the substance is concealed in compartments. Congressman, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection data evidences that more than 90% of the fentanyl that enters this country is coming through the ports of entry.
The Secretary's wrong, and he's smart enough to know that he's wrong. 90% only accounts for what is seized and not what actually makes it across the borders. Only the cartels probably, who are profiting millions, tens of millions a month, know how much fentanyl is actually making it across the borders. What could you say with respect to the Secretary's likely approach and his care for situations like yours, given that he hasn't changed his policies?
It's very difficult for me to contain what I would say. How about that?
I appreciate that.
I'd rather not say what I would like to say.
You're a classy person, and I appreciate you being here before us today.
We talked a little bit today about resources, okay? I have a resource in my purse. It's Narcan. It costs $45 in a pharmacy in Arizona. It's not free. You want to spend some money? You want to spend some of my tax dollars? Give this away for free. Everywhere. Anywhere. Everywhere. That's what you need to spend your money on. I don't want to spend any more money on illegals. I want to save lives.
Thank you. I know that you don't support the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas constitutionally. Do you support the removal, given the sheer numbers that we're seeing? Do you support the removal, or would you support the removal, period, of Secretary Mayorkas because of his failures to lead the Department of Homeland Security?
I'm simply not an expert on immigration policy.
No, it's a personal question.
I really don't have a position on the removal of Secretary Mayorkas.
Well,
as a matter of law, I don't think the basis.
No, this is a personal. I know you say constitutionally that is not the case. You don't support that. And I understand that completely. I understand your perspective, and I appreciate it. But the United States is one of the leading countries in sex trafficking. Houston, Texas, is the worst city in the country, which is in my district. I represent over 700,000 men and women in District 8 in the great state of Texas. And they are demanding the removal of Secretary Mayorkas, demanding it. And I'm the voice in Washington, D.C. to say, hey, I'm speaking for my people, and this is what they are demanding. So since the administration, President Biden will not remove Mr. Mayorkas constitutionally or however he sees it, and I understand your perspective, what I want to hear is, do you think Mr. Mayorkas needs to be removed because of his failure, in my opinion, in his role?
What I think you should tell your constituents in response to their demands is that they should vote for a different president.
Well, that's amen to that. I'm sure they're on board with that exact statement.
How is this border crisis that has been planned and executed by Secretary Mayorkas not a serious offense to public trust, Ms. Pearlstein?
Having read through the materials, I see no evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has acted on behalf of his own benefit, financially or politically. And I see no evidence that there is collusion or other cooperation or acting on behalf of foreign power.
Do you see evidence of betrayal of public trust? If you need help finding that, ma'am, look to your right. There's two mothers in here that have had their complete lives destroyed, their families destroyed. I'm going to ask Ms. Dunn, has your public trust in Secretary Mayorkas and the Department of Homeland Security been broken?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Nobles?
Yes.
Ms. Pearlstein, are you familiar with Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, often known as the Invasion Clause?
Yes, I've read the Constitution.
That's not what I asked, ma'am. I asked if you're familiar with that article.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to read it. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, and here's the point, and shall protect each of them against invasion. Ms. Nobles, Ms. Dunn, do you think that this Homeland Security Secretary is protecting these states against invasion? Is he protecting Arizona?
Arizona is not protected against invasion.
Ms. Pearlstein, after having me read that, do you think that this secretary is protecting the 50 states against invasion?
The word invasion in that clause is not in reference to migrants who are not trying to overthrow the government of the United States.
Oh, it's interesting that you say that, ma'am. Very interesting that you say that. Ma'am, Ms. Pearlstein, have you ever studied unconventional warfare? Any idea what that term means?
I've heard that term used. I'm
What do
not
you
an expert in unconventional warfare.
You have any idea what it might mean? Go ahead, take a stab at it.
I would rather hear your definition.
Okay, great. Do you think in any wild and unprecedented strategy in the history of the world, one of our adversaries might try and send their soldiers to infiltrate our country using our wide open border, not putting them in uniforms, and having them come and present themselves in front of our Border Patrol agents and tell our Border Patrol agents, oh, we're just innocent immigrants. We just want a better life. Do you think that's even possible, Ms. Pearlstein?
Might anyone ever lie at the border? Yes.
Okay. So it is possible that tens of thousands, you know that's how many we're getting a day, right, ma'am? About 10,000 a day? 10 to 15,000 a day? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of any statistics.
Okay, well, I'll fill you in then, ma'am. You're in the Homeland Security Committee. It's about 10 to 15,000 often, sometimes 12,000 a day. That's more than a combat division coming through our southern border from 160 countries, some of which are adversarial. And I'm going to tell you right now, unconventional warfare has been used since the beginning of time. These people aren't stupid. They're using access to our country to bring in individuals who want to do harm to it. I've been in the classified briefs. It's a fact, ma'am. How many families have to be ruined? How many mothers have to sit next to you before you come to understand this is an invasion of our country, and he's in complete dereliction of duty of his constitutional oath to protect and defend the United States of America? How many, ma'am? Would we need to have 100 here today for you?
Impeachment will not address the policy problem you describe.
That's not a policy problem. That is him completely derelicting his oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I read you the invasion clause. He is not doing that, ma'am. He's in complete dereliction of doing it in accordance with the other laws that other committee members have read to you today. And I think it's sad. This shouldn't be a partisan issue at all, and you know it.
Are you in the mainstream of other constitutional scholars who have taken this position, written letters to the Post, written letters to our chairman, been public about this impeachment?
I signed a letter that was, in addition to another dozen or more bipartisan set of constitutional law scholars who took the same position.
So if we're not talking about the Constitution, we're just trying to use some constitutional terms to pretend like stump the professor. We know more than they do. I would say that my colleagues across the aisle are simply just trying to put lipstick on a pig.
The hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the ranking member is recognized.
You know, we've talked several times about the rules, and we can disagree. We're Democrats and Republicans. But I call your attention to House rules that you referenced my comments that they were despicable. That's against House rules.
Actually, calling you despicable would be against House rules. Calling your words despicable are not. I can even say it's dishonest what you said. I can't say you're a liar. It's very clear, and I've made that distinction before, actually gaveling down comments made by a Republican. She actually, in that case, called the secretary a liar. She didn't say, others have said that those words are dishonest or that's a lie. You can say that. You can't say the individual is a liar. Your words were despicable. I didn't say anything about you personally.
Well, then I'm clear, as long as you didn't make Benny Thompson.
Yeah, I would never say that about an individual sitting in this committee. But I was very disappointed with your accusation that I would use these individuals as political pawns.
Mr. Chairman, your disappointment is fine. But one of the tenets of who we are as a democracy is that I have an opinion, and you have an opinion, and let's respect that. And so as long as you understand that we don't have to, we can disagree on the words. I was just trying to get clarification about that. And since you say you weren't talking about me specifically, then I'm fine. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The committee stands adjourned.